In this tutorial, what I'd like to show you is how to draw the entourage. As you can see, I have both plan views of the entourage and elevations. In the plan view that you see over on the left-hand side where it shows a 20-foot wide tree, you notice how I'm basically just projecting that information down to then construct the elevation of the tree. I'm introducing plan and elevation here so that you can understand it. And also I'm trying to show you different ways that we draw trees in our architectural plans and elevations. And we refer to these as entourage. The reason we put entourage on our drawings is to give it a sense of scale. And you'll notice those trees, they're either 20 feet tall or 30 feet tall, or the one all the way over to the right, that is much, much taller. And then in between, you see I have some shrubs and some grasses. I want to show you how to do this and then continue to introduce concepts, commands, so that you can accomplish the drawing yourself. I'll switch over to AutoCAD now, and I will start a new drawing. So I come over here to the down arrow where it says new, and I make sure to select AutoCAD DWT. And one of the first things I want to do now is to save my drawing. I'm very keyboard driven, so I like to type in save as in the command line. But if you don't want to do that, I'll go ahead and tap the escape key. You can always come back to the application button and click on save as, or actually hover over it and then click drawing. And I'll save this drawing. And it's going to be first initial last name, entourage. And then I'll go ahead and save. The next thing I'm going to do after saving that file is to format my units. So I type units, enter, and I'm going to set the length type to architectural. Precision, I'd like this to round to the nearest 32nd of an inch. Keep it at decimal degrees and keep the precision at 0.00 here. And now I will click OK. I'd like to zoom out a bit like that. And the reason for that is because I'm usually in really, really close, and what I'm about to draw is going to be bigger. So I'm eventually going to be zooming out, so why not start with that first? What I'll do now is I'll go back to the example that I have here. I'm going to focus on drawing this tree first. It is a circle that's a diameter of 20 feet. And by the way, the very light gray circles that you see, you don't have to draw those. I put them in just so that you could see the diameter there, and I can provide a dimension. So I'm going to start with a 20-foot tree. Back to my drawing. I begin by drawing a circle, and I'm going to click on the drop down, and I'd like a center diameter. So I click on that. Now, where would I like to draw this circle? Typically, I start at 0, 0. But because there's a lot of information on this drawing and I didn't quite indicate where that 0, 0 should be, you can begin anywhere. And eventually we're going to move this information around anyway. So arbitrarily right now, I'm simply going to click right here. One click, and then I take that out. And it's prompting me to specify the diameter. And the diameter here is going to be 20 feet. So I type in 20 feet and enter. And now I don't know what happened to my circle, but remember, I may be zoomed in a little too close. So I'm going to zoom out. And there it is. It's a pretty big circle, 20 feet in diameter. But watch this. If I zoom out some more, all of a sudden that circle gets a little bit smaller. It's all relative. It may appear big, it may appear small. We zoom in, we zoom out, it changes, but just know that the circle is in fact 20 foot in diameter. If you're not sure, come up to measure, click on quick, and you'll see probably the radius. But just to make sure, I'm going to select the object, right click, and I'll go over here to properties. I haven't shown this to you before, so here I'll take it nice and slow. When I click on properties, it opens up a properties window right here. And you could see that it identifies the circle. And then down here in the geometry, it shows me the radius is 10 feet and the diameter is 20 feet. So that's good to know. And what I'm going to do now is take my properties window and just move it over here to the side and then move away from it and allow it to auto hide. So now I can tap the escape key to remove the grips. Back to my example I go. And it looks like I have a couple of circles, but I'm going to hold off drawing the next one. What I'd like to do now is actually draw the tiny circle that's in the middle here in the center, and it represents the tree trunk. Diameter or the radius can be arbitrary here. And let me show you. So I'm going back to my drawing. And what I'd like to do is draw another circle. And you could pick center diameter or center radius. It doesn't matter. I'll go with center radius. And what I'd like to do is actually place that circle at the exact center of this one. Let's go back to the object snaps for a second. If I just come down here and click on the down arrow, I can see the object snaps that I currently have on. I don't have center on, and that's all right. I just want to show you this, that it is not a running object snap. And I want to show you a way to use any one of these object snaps at any time. So let me move away from that and just click away for a moment. And you'll see how it's still asking me to specify the center point for the circle. Here is where I will hold down the shift key and right click. And when I do that, it opens up this menu. I can release the shift key now. And I can come down here and click on center. And as soon as I do that, watch what happens on the screen. It says specify center point for circle. And then down at the command line, it says center of. So all it's looking for is a center. So if I hover along the edge of the circle here, notice how it finds the center and it shows it to me. So all I have to do now is just give it one click. And now I can make that circle as big as I want. And I'm looking at it, and it looks like maybe 6 inches is enough. So I'm going to type in 6 and enter. I'm not going to put the inch mark. If I leave it out, it will automatically default to inches. So I enter, and there is the circle that I wanted. Back to my example. You notice that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines coming out from the center of that smaller circle, and they're not to any exact length. They're meant to represent branches. Let me draw those in now. I'll begin by drawing one of them. I'll start by drawing a line. So I'll come up to the Home tab, Draw Panel, click on Line. Now it says specify the first point. I'd like for you to practice placing that line at the center of the circle. I don't have center as a running object snap, so I will hold down my shift key, right click, release the shift key, and select center. And now I pick the center of either circle. They're concentric, so it's going to give me the exact center that I want. So I'll simply click right here one time. It finds the center, and then I bring the line out, and the distance here is going to be arbitrary, just like the angle will be arbitrary. And I'll click right here. It wants to continue drawing lines, but I am done drawing lines. So I am simply going to enter, and that terminates the command. Back to my example. There's the line, and I'd like to put in another 4 lines. I'd like to drop in the other 4 lines. To do that, I can very easily come over here, click on line, come over, and it will find the endpoint. And all I have to do is give it one click there. And then I can click over here. I can right click and enter or cancel to terminate the command. And then I can right click again to repeat the line, pick that same endpoint and repeat this a few more times. But I'm going to undo because I'd like to show you another way to do that. And it involves using the grips. I'm going to select the line. I'm just going to click on it. And that brings up the 3 grip points, one at each endpoint and one at the midpoint. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to hover over this grip point here. And I'm going to click on it. And when I click on it, I am in the process of stretching this. But what I'd also like to do is make a copy of it. If I use my down arrow, you notice how I have some options. And I'm going to select copy. And when I do that, it will leave the original line in place. And what it's doing now is it's going to make a copy of the line. And all I have to do is simply click over here. And I am still in that mode, so I can continue to make copies like this, and like that. Actually, I think I want to put it right here. And then I right click and enter to terminate the command. And then I tap the escape key. Back to my example. And as you can see, I do need to complete this by adding one more circle. So what I'll do is simply make a copy of this bigger circle. So I come over here, Home tab, Modify Panel, Copy. I'm prompted to select objects. I select this object. Do I want to select any more objects? The answer is no. Therefore, I enter. Now that I've entered, I need to specify a base point. And what I'm going to do is actually click out here. One click for my base point. And now it wants me to specify the second point. So the second point, I'll just pick it somewhere here. And then right click, enter to terminate the command. And that completes my first tree in plan view. The next tree that I'd like to draw is the one right below. And you see, it's just a slight variation of the first one that I made. And this one, I do want to keep the branches to the inside. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I've already drawn some lines. So going back to my example, panning this up because I'd like to draw it right down here. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit so I can select my objects. So watch this. I'm going to select copy. So after I select copy, I now select my objects, and I'd like to pick my original large circle. And I'll pick a couple of the branches, actually, just let's say these two for now. Do I want to select any more objects? The answer is no, so I enter. And now for my base point, sure, I can pick the endpoint right here, click one time, and then zoom out, pan down. And I'm going to turn ortho on just to keep these aligned. So let me turn on ortho, and I'll place it right here. And then I can right click, enter to terminate the command. And now I will zoom into just this one example so that I can focus. So back to my example I go. Take a look at that. And you can see that I have let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6. Wait, let me count this again. 1, 2, starting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 branches that are the full length. I'm going to start by making the copy of those 7 branches. So I'll come over here, I select the line, and then what I'll do now is I'll come over here to this endpoint, click on it so I can stretch it, and then make sure that I can copy. Now, the last time I did this, I used my down arrow key, but now I look at my command line and I can actually type C for copy, and it will accept that option. So I type C and enter. And now I can make copies. I'll make a copy up here. Oh, wait, ortho is on. Let me turn ortho off. And I'll make a copy here. I'll make another one perhaps here. I'll pan a little bit so I can make a copy right there, here, and there. Now, I probably exceeded my number. Let me right click and enter, and then tap the escape key to be done. Now let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No, I have the right amount. The next thing I'd like to do is to go ahead and trim. Back to the Home tab, Modify Panel, and click on Trim. And then I simply just trim these segments that are outside of the circle, like this. Right-click, Enter to terminate the command. Back to my example I go. And I could see that all I have to do now is just enter some additional segments and let them go to the edge of my circle. So let's go back. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to actually start to draw lines. So I'm going to click on line. And I'd like for this line, not necessarily to be at the midpoint here, but anywhere nearest to that line. I could hold down the Shift key and right click and select nearest from here. And when I do that, it's going to find any point along that line, the nearest point that it can find based on where my cursor is located. And all I have to do is click. And then I can continue, and then I can Shift right click again and select nearest one more time and do this. So it picks the nearest point along the circumference of the circle. And I can click and then right click and enter to terminate. So you can see, because nearest is not a running object snap, I'd be doing a lot of Shift right clicking, and I don't want to do that. And because I know I'm going to be using this quite a few times right now, what I will do is actually come down here to my object snaps, and I'm going to turn on nearest. And just to make sure that I don't snap to anything else, I'll turn off intersection, midpoint, and endpoint. And then I can click off of it and continue. And this will go quick now. I will right click, repeat line, and draw a branch from, let's say, here, this nearest point, to that nearest point. Right click, enter, terminates the command. And then if I right click again, I can repeat line. And I'll do the same thing now. From the nearest point to the nearest point, right click, enter, and then right click again and repeat line from here to there. Right click and enter. This could be time consuming because I'm using my right click, but I want to introduce you now to the keyboard, specifically now to the space bar. On your keyboard, the space bar will act as the enter key. If I tap the space bar right now, notice how it says specify first point. Why is that? Because it remembers the last command, and I can go ahead and repeat it. So first point, I'll pick this point right here. And then the next point, I'll pick right here. Tap the space bar, terminates the command. Tap it again, goes back to the line command. And then space bar to terminate. Watch me now finish the rest of these just by using my space bar and then clicking on the screen. And notice how I'm not necessarily following this drawing exactly because it doesn't have to be exact. When it comes to doing trees, being arbitrary is okay because it has that natural feel to it, that natural quality to it. So back I go, and I'll go ahead and tap my space bar and then just draw my line, space bar to terminate, space bar again. And you can hear me tapping my space bar every time I do this. And that's how I can quickly make the branches of that tree. And you can embellish some more beyond what I've shown here. The point of this exercise, and specifically this tree here, this tree symbol, is to help you use the line command and use the space bar to repeat those steps. And as you practice them, you'll get comfortable using them. I have both of these symbols of the tree drawn, and they are both valid. And you might even see other versions, or rather other variations, and those are acceptable. In architecture, what we draw in a plan view, so long as that looks like the object that we want it to represent, we're going to be in good shape. In the last assignment, when I was showing you how to draw the sofa, it looked like a 3-seat sofa. It looked like a 2-seat sofa. So long as it looks, or it has the appearance, then we find it acceptable. These symbols here look like trees from the top looking down, so we use them. Now, over here, this is going to be my elevation of the tree. So with this one, I do want to be mindful that I draw it the right way, and I did provide some additional dimensions there. And you could see that I do have the radius. I'm maintaining, not the radius, well, radius diameter of the diameter of 20 feet. I'm maintaining a 20-foot diameter there because I'm projecting the information down. Let me go ahead and proceed with that drawing, and I'll show you how I'm going to do this. I'm keeping in mind that I have the, let's see, the circle, if we look at this carefully, is 4 feet from the ground. And then the tree trunk is actually 8 feet from the ground. It might help me to, first of all, make a copy of that circle and then draw, it looks like a line 4 feet from the quadrant point down and then 4 feet from the quadrant point up. And then I definitely want a ground line there. Back to my assignment I go. I'm going to zoom out. And as I did with my previous exercise, I'm going to turn off this grid in the background, only because it's easier for me to see the drawing. It's a personal preference. You don't have to. I turn it off, and it's a softer background on the eyes. So what I'd like to do is I would like to begin by making a copy, first of all, of this circle. So I select the circle, I enter, and I'll just copy it straight down, and I'll turn ortho back on. All right, panning the drawing down a little bit, and I'll place it right here. And then I will right click and enter. If I look at my example again, 4 feet from the ground and then 8 feet up. I was just thinking about this, and I think I'll draw this a little differently right now. I basically just want to get the 4 feet straight down first in order to establish ground. I'll go back to my drawing here. I'll zoom in, and I'd like to draw a line. And this time, instead of going to the line command up there in the ribbon, I'll simply type L and then enter. For the first point, I want it to be right here at this quadrant point, not the nearest point. What I'd like to do is shift right click and pick quadrant point. And now it will identify the quadrant point. Notice it's not finding the nearest point. I have selected quadrant to be the one and only object snap right now. So I'm going to take that, draw it straight down, and I'm going to type in 4 feet and enter. And now what I'd like to do is, before I complete this, I'm just going to draw myself a line over here about this long. And then I will click, and then I will right click, enter to terminate the command. This represents the ground. And then what I'll do is simply select this line representing the ground, select it from this grip point and stretch it across right here. That represents the ground. I'll tap the escape key, pan my drawing so I could see most of it here. And now what I will do is take this bottom line, offset it up 8 feet, not going to the ribbon. Keyboard is much quicker for me. I simply type O, which is my keyboard shortcut or my command alias in AutoCAD, O and enter, and that's offset. Specify the offset distance, 8 feet, enter. I select this line and I offset it up like this and enter. And now I can go ahead and take this line and extend it up. I go back to the Home tab, Modify Panel, and it's hiding underneath my Trim command. So if I click on the down arrow here, the opposite of Trim is Extend. So I click on Extend, and I simply take this line and extend it up there. And then I right-click, Enter to terminate the command. And now I don't need this line anymore. So I'm going to select it and tap my delete key. So now if I go back to my example, I have what I wanted. Now in this example, I want to show you, let me just bring this in a bit. And I want you to see how the lines, they're branches. And if I look at this carefully, I basically have 1, 2, 3, 4 major branches coming away or coming off of that line. And they don't all go to the end of the circle. They just stop short of it, and the angle is arbitrary. And then from that, I begin to draw additional lines that will take me to the edge of the circle. And then in some cases, some of them don't make it. I'll begin by putting in these 4 lines. So from here, I'll type L and enter. It does find the nearest, but I'm not sure I want the nearest in this case. I want to make sure I find the endpoint. So I'm going to use my shift right click and force it to find the endpoint. So now that it finds the endpoint, I select it, I turn ortho off, and I'll take this line up about this far. And then tap the escape key, or actually no, enter, terminates the command. And then I'll take advantage of my grips. I'll select the line, grip the endpoint, select it, and yes, I want to stretch it, but I'd like to make a copy. So I type C and enter. I'll make a copy of it here, make another copy there, and another copy here. And then right click, enter to terminate. Tap the escape key. Now's a good time, if you wanted to actually select each one individually, grip it, and just change it if you aren't satisfied with the location, right? And you'll notice I'm stretching this endpoint and it maintains the endpoint over here. It doesn't change that. Now I'll tap my escape key, go back to my example, and let's see. I can now begin to add some lines that will extend perhaps to the edge of the circle, or maybe not. I'll add secondary branches, and the secondary branches, I'll just be very arbitrary with them, and I can always come back and add more if I wanted to. So let me begin with that. Secondary branches coming off of the primary ones, and I'll zoom in, and then I'll begin just like I did before with the line command. I can type L, enter, specify the first point. It is finding the nearest, which is what I want. So I'll take it up to about right here. Tap the space bar to terminate the command. Space bar again to pick it up. I'll take this one. I'll let that one go to the end point or the nearest point here of the circle. click, spacebar, spacebar, continue. I'll go to my next one, take it up about here, spacebar, spacebar again. I'll take this one about that far. Tap my spacebar to terminate, spacebar again to continue. And I think I want one branch right down here like this. Okay. And I'm just trying to visualize what this can look like. And maybe I come back and erase some lines. I'm definitely adding more. Just be playful with it. Have fun. Be creative. I think I want one right in here like this. And then perhaps one more. For some reason, I just feel like placing it right there. Okay. And then to finish it off, I'll continue, and now I will go all the way to the edge of my circle. And these, you can refer to them as perhaps the tertiary set of lines. And you notice that I'm not necessarily just taking them off of the secondary lines. I actually went back to my original 4 lines, and I'm maybe pulling some directly from there or adding some there too, because I'm looking at this and there seems to be just a little bit of an empty spot right here. So I'll go ahead and drop a line in there like that, just to fill it up a little bit. So feel free, like I said, to embellish as much as you'd like. Maybe have some of them cross over. Maybe I could take a line from here and just have it cross over like that. That might help. Maybe like this. And perhaps a line right in here. And then I'll go back to my example. I had the circle in there as a guide, and now I can go ahead and remove my circle on my drawing. So I'll take the circle, select it, and then tap the delete key. And there's my tree. I've drawn 2 examples of a tree in plan view, and then this is the elevation. And in a way you can see, I've projected that 20-foot diameter down. Let me go ahead and continue. If I zoom this out, sorry, zooming in, zoom it out. And I'd like to now draw this, these 2 examples. And this is going to be a 15-foot wide tree. And then with this one, I'd like to introduce a new command that will help out. And as you can see, right, there was no exact start point, and that's okay. Back to my example here. What I'm going to do is, first of all, take this line and actually extend it out, just stretch it out. I'll turn ortho on, just like that. And then what I'd like to do is make a copy. So let me tap the escape key first, and then come over here to copy. And I'd like to copy this circle. So I select it, I enter, and I'll just copy it over straight this way. And then tap the escape key to terminate the command. And then I'll select the circle, come over here to my properties, and I'll change the diameter from 20 feet to 15 feet. I just type in the value and enter. And you'll see that the circle changes. And that's exactly what I wanted. And now I hover away from my properties window and it will auto hide. Tap the escape key. Back to my example. And you'll notice that I have, well, I made this copy only because it was the circle that was right next to it. And I guess I can make a copy above as well, just to have the 2 circles now, and then I'll begin. So I'll take this circle. I'm going to right click, repeat copy, select it, enter, and just copy it from this point. Notice how I don't have to pick any endpoint or midpoint or intersection, just a free point out here in space. I click one time and I take it straight up. Any distance, it doesn't have to be exact, arbitrary, so long as it's at more or less at that location. So I click, and then I right click and enter to terminate the command. I'm going to begin with the circle up above, and eventually you'll see that the circle that I've drawn in there, we will delete. It just serves as a guide right now. But I'd like to begin by drawing this line right here that will allow me to go straight from the center up to the quadrant point. That's what I'm doing now. Zooming in like this, and line. So I type L, enter. Specify first point. Right now it's still focused on the nearest, and that's all right. I'm going to use Shift right click to force it to find the center. And then I click anywhere along the edge, finds the center, take it straight up, and then Shift right click, force it to find the quadrant point, which is this one right here. That's it. I don't want to draw any more lines, so I enter. Terminates the command. So now what I'd like to do is actually construct what is called a polar array. Here's what I'm going to do. From the Home tab, Modify panel, I click on the down arrow where it says Array. And I'd like to draw what's called a polar array. Now you notice it says that it's going to distribute the objects in a circular pattern. And that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to click on Polar Array. And then I select the object that I want to array, which is this line. I pick it. And then I enter. Now it prompts me to specify the center point of the array. Well, the center point is the circle endpoint right there, right? Or actually the line endpoint and the circle center point. But I'm still stuck on nearest, so I better make sure that I Shift right click and I'll pick center and click here. So it finds that center. Notice how my ribbon above has changed. And now it's showing me the properties of my array. Looking here, it says number of items. I have 6 items, 60 degrees between each items. That's the angle between them, and it fills 360. But I'd like to increase the number of items. So I can come over here to item, double click, and I can select, let's say 12, and enter. When I type 12, it changes that angle now to 30. If I go back to my example, you'll notice that maybe I have 12 around that number, maybe a few more. I'll let you pick whatever value is good for you, whatever number sits well with you. So I look at this and maybe I'll double click and change that now to, oh, I don't know, let's say 20 and enter. All right, maybe that's a better number. So now come over to the properties and you'll see how it is set to be associative. Basically, this means that it's going to act as one array. So all of the lines are associated. So it's one array, not individual line segments. And for my example, what I'd like to do is actually turn off associative. That way it doesn't keep them together as a group. And then I go ahead and click Close Array. That's all done. And now as I hover over them, you'll notice it is selecting them individually. And here's where, if you notice, I basically just remove a few lines here and there. That's it. So when I go to my example, I say to myself, all right, I think I want this one to be removed. So I highlight it and I tap the delete key. Maybe I want this one removed, delete. And this one, delete. And then maybe one more like this. It's just representing the branches that are coming out from the center. But what I'm trying to do is give it more of, let's say, an organic look and feel to it. Be creative, whatever you decide is fine. And I'll say this too, if you'd like to leave the circle there, go right ahead. If you'd like to remove the circle, you can go ahead and just grip it, click on it rather, and then delete. I leave it in your hands, whatever you'd like to do is fine. And now when I zoom out, you'll see it's meant to represent that tree. The next thing I'd like to do is construct this tree. And I also want to repeat the polar array, only this time I'll keep it associative. Let me draw the circle here as well. Go back to my example. And I'll zoom in and pan it right there and draw a circle. And you know what? Let me pause for a moment because I no longer need that nearest, or at least I don't need it right now. And it's for whatever reason in my mind, I just keep going back to it that I need to fix this. So I'm going back to my object snaps. I'm going to turn off nearest. I'm going to make sure I have endpoint, midpoint, intersection going. And I'll tell you what, looks like I'm using center a bit here. I might as well just turn that on. So there it is. And now I'll click off of it. We're all set. I go back to draw a circle. It doesn't matter if it's center radius or center diameter, because I know that all I have to do now is just find the center like this, and then find how big of a circle I'd like to make. And in my case, 6 inches again. So I'll type 6 and enter. And that's the center. Next thing to do is draw the line. Only this time I'm going to start from the top and I'm going to take it down. I'll go back to my line command. I'd like to pick the quadrant point. So shift right click, quadrant. I pick this quadrant point here and I bring it down and I'll draw it for now a length of 12 inches. And then I'll enter to terminate the command. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to like that 12-inch length or if I want to increase it, but I'm doing this on purpose because I want to show you how to, first of all, construct a polar array and then how to modify the array. I'll go back to my array, make sure I select polar, and it looks like it was already selected, and that's fine. So I click on polar array. I'm asked to select the object, and it's just this one line. Selected, and now I enter. Specify the center point. Okay, it's the center of this circle, so I click. And now it gives me my objects, 6 items. I want to make sure that I make it associative. And now when I go to my items, I'll change that number. Maybe this time I pick something like 40 items, enter. They are associative, and I will go ahead and close the array. Done. And like I said, you can either keep this circle or you can delete it, your choice. And now let's say that I look at it and I go, well, I'd like that line to be just a little bit longer. So I need to edit the polar array. I select the polar array. And once I select it, it takes me into the array tab. And from here, I can go ahead and select edit source. And when I click edit source, it asks me to select the item in the array. So pick any one of the lines. They're all the same. But I'll go ahead and pick the first one, the one that I started with. So I select it. It tells me that I'm about to edit source objects, and make sure to enter array close to end the editing session. So I click OK. And now that's the one line I'd like to focus on. And you notice how everything is highlighted. One little trick that I learned, tap the escape key. And what it will do is it will just take the focus and place it specifically on that one line. And now I'm going to zoom in a bit here because I need to control this line and just pan to. I'm going to click on it. And then I'd like to take this endpoint and bring it straight down. And you notice when I go to bring it down, Notice how all of the other lines also get longer. And that's because it's associative. How much longer do I want to make it? I'll say 6 inches. So I type 6 and enter. And you notice they all adjusted. If you want, you can take it one step further. Select the line. I'm sorry, just grip the line here at this endpoint. And then take it across at an angle. And look at what that will do. And let the angle be, or the distance here be arbitrary, nothing exact. You can go ahead and click. And then zoom it out. And look at what I just did. If you like that, great. Make sure you go ahead and click Save Changes to this array. Done. Now I want you to see, the reason I kept this array associative is because I had to make sure that all of the lines reacted the same way. Whereas on this example, I did not want them to be associative because I wanted to make sure that I could delete just a couple here and there. Keep that in mind. Now I'm going to come down here and I will proceed to draw the tree. It's going to be 30 feet tall and the width of it on it is going to be 15 feet. And you can see that the lines are 1 foot apart. And I'm going to use the array command to do this. 30 feet and then 3 feet, and then it's 15 wide. Those are just some numbers I want to keep in mind. I will begin by drawing a line. So I'll type L and then enter. And I'll take it from the center here and just bring it straight down. I'll click and then come down here. Now watch this. If I try to click right there, it's going to find a midpoint, or it can even find an endpoint. I don't want that. Go ahead and shift right click and then click on perpendicular. And it will take that line and draw it so that it's perpendicular to the bottom one here. So I click and then I go ahead and enter. I terminate the command. It is a tree that's 30 feet in height. So I'm going to offset that bottom line by 30 feet. So I type O. That's my keyboard shortcut for offset, and enter. Distance 30 feet, enter. I select the line down here and I offset it up 30 feet. Now, my objects are a little close to each other. And if yours are overlapping, don't worry about a thing, because guess what? Let me enter. And the next thing I can do is this. I can actually just take these objects here, my array in the circle, and I can move them up. So I'm going to do this, move, just window them like that, enter, and just pick a point out here, orthos on. So I'm just going to move them up like this, and they're out of the way. That's all. That's my 30-foot height, and it needs to be 15 feet wide. Let me show you a couple of ways I can do this. Half of 15 feet is 7.5 feet. One way to do it is to offset. So I offset a distance of 7.5 feet and enter. And I offset this line out that way. I offset this line out this way and enter. And then I can take my grips and grip it and bring it right here. That takes care of that one. Tap the escape key, use my grips, grip it here and stretch it there. So that's one way to do it. The other way, if I offset, undo, this is what I have. I could draw myself a circle. So I type C and enter down here at this endpoint. And I can draw that circle to be 7.5 feet in radius, which gives me the 15-foot diameter. And then I simply draw a line, enter, from this intersection up here to that intersection, and then straight down to this intersection, and then enter. And then this circle no longer needed, and I delete. Either way is fine. And you notice how I'm drawing additional lines just to get my geometry right. And when I'm done with the lines, I can delete them. So it looks like I no longer need this line, so I can select and delete. I no longer need this line, select and delete. And now back to my example. And it shows that I guess I should have left that line in there. I'm going to come back and undo. 3 feet off the ground. Let me go there. And it looks like I should undo, take this line and delete it. But before I delete that one, I will do one offset here of 3 feet from the ground up like that, and enter. And now I can trim. My keyboard shortcut is TR, enter. I'll trim this line here, enter, and then just take this segment that was left over and delete it. And then over here, I could also trim. So let me type TR again. Actually, no, right click, repeat, recent input, trim. And trim this line here, and then trim that line there. I have a segment over there. I can actually click it. I'm erasing it with trim, and it works. Trim this, trim that, and enter. And now it's just a matter of arraying 1 foot apart. So let me go back to the example just to double check it. Yes, 1 foot apart, all the way to the top. So I'll zoom in just so I can see that tree. I will go to the array command, but click on the drop down. So I click on rectangular array. I'm prompted to select the object that I would like to array, and it's going to be this line right here. I select it and I enter. And you'll notice, let me zoom out a little bit. You see what it's doing? It's actually giving me 4 columns. And then if I zoom in a little bit closer, I'm getting 3 rows. So I want to come back to my drawing here, pan right to that, zoom and pan to that location, come up to my columns and set that column, double click inside that text box, set it to 1 and enter. Okay, so now I just have 1. Now the number of rows, before I enter that value, I'm going to come down here and change the distance between my rows. I'm going to double click and set that to 12 inches. So I type 12 and enter. It defaults to a foot. That's fine. And then the number of rows, I really don't know how many rows I want. So watch this. If I go to my drawing and I hover and then I click over this grip, this arrow, click it 1 time, and I'll take my cursor and move it up, 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 all the way to this endpoint and stop right there and click. It has generated the array that I want, and it's giving me the number of rows that are necessary because I controlled that using my grips. And now that I'm done, I can go ahead and close the array, but I'm taking a quick glance over here and it tells me that it's going to be associative, and I cannot have it be associative because I have to trim. So I'm going to turn off associative and then I'll close the array. Finally, I'm going to trim. Keyboard shortcut, TR, and enter. It can be very time consuming to try to trim each one of these individually. So I don't do that. What I like to do is simply come up here, click 1 time, and it's going to generate a fence. And then I come down here and I click. Go ahead and give it a click and drag. And when you click and drag, it's just going to give you this free-form fence. And this could be a little bit more time consuming, and I won't be able to get to all of them. So I'll stop here, release. It trimmed all of those, and then I just have to zoom in and trim this piece. And then I can zoom out. And then right-click, enter to terminate the command. And as I've said before, if you'd like to keep the lines in there, the ones that are going up at an angle, you certainly can, but I'm going to take mine, select them, and delete. And that's my tree. If I go back to my example here, doing well so far, I get the feeling that you know how to complete this example of grasses. This small bush here, it's using the polar array command. This taller example here is simply using the line command and then using the nearest. I'm going to hold off showing that to you because what I'd like to do is actually come on out here and show you how I would draw this tree as an example. Let me go ahead and draw the other tree. So for this tree, you'll notice the height on that much taller. Feel free to draw guidelines for yourself. If I look at the 30-foot height over here and I carry that over, looks like I have the 30-foot height and maybe about another 20 feet. So perhaps we can try a 50-foot tall tree. And then at the base, right, you can see right here, how high off the ground is that? Maybe it's about 8 feet off the ground. We can assume 8 feet and then a 50-foot height. So let me show you how I would do this. So I'll go back to my example, come over here for a second. Oh, and also if I look at my tree, right, look at the overall width. It's almost as tall as it is wide. Let me begin first by establishing that overall height. So I'm going to offset 50 feet. Now I'm going to take this line up 50 feet like that. My tree, let's start it down here at the ground right here. So I'm going to draw another line and I'll shift right click to find a nearest point on that line right about here or so. And I'll take that straight up, let's say 8 feet. I think that's how tall it was. And now try doing your best to visualize that tree that would go in this space right here. And what I'll proceed to do now is I'll come over here to my draw panel. And I was going to draw a polyline, but let me see something. If I come down over here to draw, I can see about doing a spline, and it says draws a spline with fit points. I also have something here called draw spline with control vertices. Let me show you examples of all three, how I would do this. So let me start with this one first, my spline fit. So with spline fit, asks me to specify the first point. So I pick a point, or I pick this endpoint here, and then I turn ortho off, and I begin to draw the tree like this. You see what it's doing? It's following, and I'm not going to make it as tall. For some reason, I'm not quite there. I'm making a bit of a different shaped tree, but you can see how it's creating what we call a spline. So I can go here now, go there, maybe drop it a little bit. And then when I get to this point right here, before I click, there's an option, and it's called close. So I want to make sure I close this spline. So I type C and enter. It just took a moment. Now that that's done, if I select this spline, you see how it has the points. And I can actually take these points and move them a bit just to give my tree some shape. There's a down arrow here. If I click on the down arrow, it's set to fit, but I can now change it to control vertices. And now what that does is changes it, and now I can control in a different manner. You see that? And I can adjust the shape of this tree, the silhouette, more or less. And then I'll tap the escape key. So that's one way to do it. And that was just an approximation. What I did here is more of a free form tree. And the others that I've drawn are somewhat rigid. following some specific dimensions. So I want you to balance that and, practice both types. Okay, so that was using my spline. So let me go ahead and select this and delete. I'll go back to my draw drop down. And I believe I did a spline fit, and now I'm going to do spline control vertice. And I'm pretty sure it's the same thing, but instead of beginning one way and then switching it over, I will now start with, let's see, a first point here. And as I pick my next point, you see how now it is allowing me to use those control vertices. So it's no different. I'm just starting this using the other method. So I'll go ahead now and type C for close and enter. And now if I select it, you see that? It decided, or the idea here was, now I begin with control vertices, whereas the last time I started with fit points. It's just a different way of starting. And now if I go back here, I can adjust these and change the locations. So that works. I'll tap the escape key. I'm sorry, delete, since it's already gripped, and erase. Now, the other way to do this is simply to go with a polyline. And I'll click on polyline. And for a polyline, this one now is going to be rigid. It's just giving me an opportunity to draw a tree, but it's using straight lines. And you can do this. If this is your style, it works. And I'll come over here and type C for close, because that's valid also. I'm showing a tree that has this unique shape to it. Any one of those three are valid. And I'll say this with the polyline, if you decide that you want to change your mind and go with some type of a spline, what you can do, let me see if I can find it here on my drop down. I know I can modify. Oh, sorry, wrong drop down. I'll come over here to modify. And you could see this icon here where it says edit spline. No, that's not the one I want. Okay. I want to pick edit polyline. I select it. And then look at here. I have the option to make a spline out of it. So I click spline and it takes on that shape. And then I can enter to terminate the command and I'm all set. I can pick it to spline, but now I don't have an option of changing it to control points or whatever that other option was, but at least it allowed me to adjust the shape and give it more of a free flow. And notice how it's not touching down here at the bottom. It's okay. It's fine. Doesn't have to, but you certainly could come in here and maybe just bring this down a little bit and have it overlap. Oh, just by a bit right there. I'm not going to get it exact, good enough. And I've got myself that tree. And then this line over here. Let's see, I don't need this line, so I'll go ahead and delete. And this is my example. The last thing I will do is to move my objects. Notice where my UCS icon is located. That's my start point. That's my 0, 0. And we typically draw in this upper quadrant where all of our X and Y coordinates are positive. Right now, my Y coordinates are negative. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on move. I'm going to select all my objects like this, enter. I'm going to pick this endpoint right here and just bring everything up so that it's within the positive XY coordinates like this. There we go.